Welcome everybody to the Konker podcast with myself, Jevon and my glamorous co-host,
Maddi Capman.
Fantastic. Why are we here? What are we here for? We're in the business of speaking to as many people as we can, documenting different routes, how different people are conquering their journey. And we are also here for
Defining people's success. So everybody, like Jevon said, is on their different journey, and through that journey, hopefully everyone's goal is to reach their own success. So we're here to talk to everybody and listen to everybody's stories of their definition of success.
Fantastic. So I've put together a little intro for you here today.
Cool.
And we're gonna go through it nicely. So we've got today surfer, rower, tick, open water and pool swimmer, cyclist, road cyclist, I add, runner. So basically group that as a triathlete, should we say?
Yeah, got them.
Once a year.
Yeah.
Paddleboarder.
I did 2 last year.
Paddleboarder. And we kind of put that all-round waterman, I reckon.
Yeah.
You know, you're definitely a waterman.
AKA Aquaman.
Aquaman. Yeah, nice. But most importantly, you're structural engineer.
I am a structural engineer.
Mark Harris, welcome to the Conquering podcast.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Brilliant. Yeah. Good week. How's it been? What have you been up to?
It's been all right. I've been out on site already this morning, looking at a nice structure that is on sheepskin tannery
Wow.
in Bovey Tracy,
The
which
life
is
of a structural engineer.
Buckfast Lee. So I avoided getting some alcohol. I was at the football last night, wasn't I? That was good. Done some running, done some cycling. It was 2-1 to Exeter. I nearly said Peterborough.
Yeah.
Who were you supporting last night?
Do you know what? I was mixed. I
You
was
were
like, it was a win-win either way because Peterborough is where I grew up.
Yeah.
So it's all
We'll
good.
get into that.
Yeah.
We will get into that. So get the ball rolling. That's the right saying, isn't it? Let's get the ball rolling. Introduce yourself, Mark, and tell us a little bit more about what you do. Sorry.
So Mark Harris, I'm the director here at StrcutureHaus. Been with StrcutureHaus now for 4 years. I've been in the industry of structural engineering for 20 years, which is really weird because I'm only 32, so I don't know how I managed that. Structural engineering is what I do. I'm chartered structural engineer now, and kind of responsible for mostly the Exeter part of structural engineering for us at StrcutureHaus. And then we've got an office in London as well, in Richmond Green. So that's our income comes kind of 40%, 60% from both those 2 offices. But this is kind of our main engineering hub, if you like.
Nice.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, I don't really know what a structural engineer does very well. You know, you kind of know the basics, don't you?
Yeah.
It's always a bit of a strange one. But you know, obviously we're here to document part of your journey, how you got into it, that sort of thing. So we're going to throw it right back to when you were, let's say, 12 years ago, as you say, if you're 32.
I might have not been honest.
when you're, I don't know, thinking about going to uni, or, you know, where did like the first idea for you to become an engineer, or, you know, just a structural engineer come about? How did that happen?
Where did it change? Where did it come out? So I'm going to be completely honest, and structural engineering wasn't something that I even knew existed.
Yeah.
And I bet if you ask most school children now what structural engineering was, they'd be going, I don't know. But if you say a mechanical engineer or an electrical engineer, they go, oh yeah, like you do lights or you do whatever. You know. So on the table is my JCB from my 12 Christmas present from when I was about 12. And I think I've always liked engineering and how things go together and the design of that. And I think that, so did my GCSEs, didn't really want to do A-levels. And so there was this course called BTech engineering. And I was like, let's try that. That was in Peterborough where I grew up. And we did 2 days of that week were in this factory, or this apprenticeship factory for Perkins Engines, which is absolutely huge. If you everybody's heard of Cat and Massey Ferguson and those kind of companies, their engines are built by this company called Perkins.
Oh, really?
And that's in Peterborough. Like probably, I don't know, 3,000-4,000 people work there, and their apprenticeship.
Are they still about?
They are, and their apprenticeship place at one point used to put 150 odd people through a year. So that was how big it was. Yeah, crazy big.
What type of engineering was that then?
So that was mainly that was mechanical and electrical. So we were doing like welding, we were doing the circuit building, we were doing milling, lathing, kind of all of that kind of like
really
stuff.
Hands-on stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. The bit that is great, but it's kind of it's building. So anyway, I finished this course and kind of thought, I'll carry on. Yeah. So I moved down to Kent for a couple of years and did the OND, which is like the national diploma. So kind of A-level type.
Yeah.
And
you're showing your age there now.
Yeah, I know.
You've just
the 32 is like, it's like.
Do you mean GCSEs?
Yeah. I got a level 7. Don't even know what that means. So kind of flunked the second year because I discovered alcohol and beach life and stuff like that. So I took on an apprenticeship as a maintenance engineer, and I recouped myself on the education front. And then I was like, well, actually, there is a chance here to go to university. This is like, if I'm going to do it, let's do it now. If it fails, it fails. But if it doesn't, then I won't be a maintenance engineer for the rest of my life, maybe.
Yeah.
And that was it. I applied to Nottingham Trent University, which is where the rowing came in, because I was Nottingham's got like one of the biggest rowing lakes that there is. And the National Sports, So we had the Trent and we had the National Sports Centre, where at that point the Awesome Foursome, which is again showing my age, we're doing lots of training there. So that was pretty cool.
So just going back, you started off the very sort of start of like your professional qualification, so to speak, for engineering was BTech. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it was general engineering, and my intention at that point was to go to university to do general engineering. It wasn't. I didn't want to pigeonhole mechanics, and I didn't want to pigeonhole electrics, and I'd never even heard of civil engineering. So I did this access course because I didn't have like the A-levels, and on the access course halfway through they said, here's another bunch of degrees that actually you could swap and change and do any of these other degrees, and civil was one of them. And I read it and was like, this sounds actually far more interesting.
Why was it more interesting?
Because it was broader, I think. So one of the things which we'll probably delve into later, and one of the reasons why I think we do really well at StrcutureHaus is got really short attention spans, and we get bored really quickly and really easily, as in myself and Dave, my co-director. And so I was just like, if I'm going to just be a mechanical engineer and just do that, I felt like that wouldn't keep me switched on enough. And I think that like that beautiful introduction that you just did. I like to do lots of different things.
You're a busy boy. Aren't you?
Exactly. I don't sit still for too long, and I
We've tied you down to that chair for 2 hours.
I know. Yeah, exactly.
So
I'm nervous.
Your interest in engineering came from more of like a creative side rather than like a strategic side. In the beginning.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was it. But at the same time, at this point, I thought I want to be outside. I still want to like build the stuff. And I did, as part of my degree, I did a sandwich degree with Carillion, who are no longer with us, unfortunately, putting trams back into Nottingham as part of like the strategy of kind of getting rid of cars in cities, really. And that was like the concept that they wanted to do. There was a £200 million project. It was absolutely huge. But what I felt, and what led me into the consultancy aspect, was when I was on site, you kind of just telling people how to implement somebody else's design by saying dig holes there, fill concrete there, put reinforcement there. And it wasn't until something went wrong on site that I got more excited about it.
The problem solving side of things, was it? Construction.
Absolutely. Yeah, indeed. And I think that after that it was like consultancy. So even when I was doing a degree, to say I was going to be a structural consulting engineer, I would have got no. No. So it's like, as I've become more aware of things, my interest is kind of, I believe in destiny, and I think that's kind of what's happened. It's like,
I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because they're like, not a lot of people know what they want to do, like, until they actually start doing something, do they? No. And like, sounds like you actually chose quite a or like, you know, the right kind of path, because you went quite general to start, didn't you, with your BTech?
Yeah, exactly.
And then you sounds like you learned a lot of different principles in engineering, and then you actually sort of just naturally gravitated towards what you wanted to do and what you enjoyed the most. And that's like quite a nice bit of information, or a good piece for people getting into engineering. Start general like you did.
Yeah. And I think so. One of the better things about today and where we are now in the technology that we've got is like, I lied, I'm not 32, I'm 46. and
you lied.
How has things changed? So when I was at school, I basically said, I want to work outside and I want to use my hands. And they said, right, you can be a bricklayer, or you can be a farmer. And I was like, I don't want to be either of those.
Is that it?
Where now it's like the youth of today and the children who are at schools, like part of, and I guess we'll get into it later, part of the reason that I like my position here at StrcutureHaus is that I've got the ability to go out and go to these schools and talk to school children about actually what is structural engineering.
Yeah.
It isn't just bridges. Shock horror.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of what you think, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I was quite similar to you. Like when I was younger, I don't know where it came from. Like I kept saying that I wanted to be a civil engineer. Yeah. I didn't know what it was. I just wanted to like build things.
That is so rare.
But it's quite a boy thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know? But I didn't know what a civil engineer did. I'd never heard of structural engineering. That's for sure. And I was probably quite young, but I'd never heard of mechanical, electrical, never heard of like architecture. But then when you're growing up and you're like doing your GCSEs and you're like actually working towards these sort of things, they're still quite unknown, aren't they? Or they definitely were unknown when I was doing my qualifications to be able to try and work out what I wanted to do. You know, it was construction or architecture.
Yeah.
And like, is there a lot more coverage, or is there a lot more exposure to younger people about what's out there with these sort of specific disciplines, that sort of thing?
There is definitely. So some of the stuff that I've done in more recent years as a director and, you know, kind of somebody in a business that's kind of promoting businesses more is working with the local schools, the local college, and we've got a really great college in Exeter, and the local university. We've got one of the best universities as well. Yeah. So I have done some STEM ambassador type stuff. So STEM is like science, technology, engineering, and maths. Glad I remember that.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Wow.
That was impressive, wasn't it?
My breath for you then.
Yeah. I was like, I'm going to stumble. So that was basically, we did this thing called Go For Set, which used to be with Flybe before they went under, but it was what is now the college have now adopted that building as their future skill centre. So, and that was working with, one was with I did it for 2 years. One was with St. Peter's School and one was with Dawlish Community School. And they had like a project, and it was like the children that were interested, or learners they're called nowadays apparently. The learners were interested in maths or technology, or, you know, we had like technical drawing at school, and that was about as close as this gets.
Yeah.
And so they were doing like a little project of you had to build a school or you had to build this, and it was with 14-ish year olds, 13 to 14, and yeah, we're going out and we're in the industry with all our experience, talking to these 14-year-olds about
what they could do.
What they could do, yeah. And then so I've done stuff with the college in terms of some of their T-level students that they have and their like end of year presentation, and a lot about sustainability that I'm sure we'll get into later, and that kind of stuff. So yeah.
I mean, it's great to see how much like impact you can have on the journey that you've had, and what kind of career people can have to have those interests. Like, you know, the Lego, people play with Lego so much. Every child probably has Lego in their house. So to know that, you know, if you're interested in that, there is pathways.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do think as well, like when you're at that age, I don't know, let's say just before your GCSEs and you're going in to choose your A-levels or BTech, it's great because there are so many options now. But you kind of just need that education of actually what's out there, don't you? Because there's so many different things out there to do.
So my half-brother is an environment artist for building computer games, and he works at a company called Dambuster in Nottingham, and like he gets paid. He gets paid as much as our graduates, and he just builds computer games. But these games get sold for £60 each, and it's you know, it's a career.
Yeah.
So I like that. Still blows my mind to an extent.
Creative.
But you know, in terms of technology and computers and the games, like we had like Paperboy.
So going back to the qualifications then, best bit of advice you could offer somebody who's maybe at GCSE level, you know, and has to actually start making decisions about their future, how if they wanted to be an engineer of sort, or even let's say a structural engineer because it's specific, what would you do? What route would you take?
Yeah, do you know what? It's a really interesting question, and I sit on the fence with it quite a lot. And there's a good reason why I sit on the fence, and that is because we are in this change at the moment, and you will notice that T levels is a new thing, and if anybody doesn't know, T level is basically a technical A level of a sort. So they're at college and they're doing A levels, but with a focus. So we've taken on a T level student who knows that he wants to be a structural engineer. And he's 17.
Wow.
So he's already getting some office experience at that age. Where for us, I was kind of still fumbling around at college, playing around on the beach. So the experience is one of the biggest parts of my job. Is like when I was a graduate, I was looking at my directors at the time and I was like, how am I ever going to know that much stuff? They know everything.
Yeah.
It's like, it blows your mind. And then all of a sudden, a few years later, and a bit later, you're like, oh yeah, I do know a reasonable amount of stuff. So the experience is more important than the qualifications. But the qualifications, ultimately still at this point, I think getting yourself chartered is really important, and it's restrictive in terms of the amount of engineering that you can do, and having career progression is really important, because to be a director or to have a business that can sell structural engineering and consulting, you need to have a chartered engineer.
Why is that? What's important about that?
So the Institute of Structural Engineers, they kind of specify that it's tough to get chartered. There's a tough regime in there. There's core objectives that you need to do. I'm going to paraphrase because otherwise it takes too long.
Yeah.
There's 13 core objectives. There's an interview with professionals, and then there's a 7-hour exam where you get like a short toilet break, and it's intense.
Yeah.
And it covers all of everything that we do. But from that point, it's then, well, you recognize what you know, but you also recognize what you don't know, and where you perhaps sometimes need to get more experience. We don't stop learning. We do something which we call CPD, which is continual professional development. The guys who are working up to it, they do their IPD, which is their initial professional development, to get them ready for their core objectives. I've lost the trail of the question though. Where we go?
What's the reason for the chartership? What enables?
Sorry. So basically, some of the councils will basically say we want a chartered engineer to sign off our stuff. So some of the government funded projects, they will want a chartered structural engineer to be involved. So it's just that it's a bit like being a chartered accountant, I suppose. It's the recognition that there's somebody in your business that has got enough experience and enough quality and knowledge for you to sell what you sell, basically. To
sign it off almost and put your name to it. Is that exactly what it has to be?
That's basically it in a nutshell.
I suppose the governing body or the chartership council body, whatever, they're the ones also putting their name to it because they're the sort of reputation.
Exactly. And then on a flip side, as a director, obviously, a big part of my job is building the team and employing people. And when people get later on in their careers, I kind of think, why didn't you get chartered? It's like,
So at what point in your career did you decide, or was it, decided for you that you could become? How does it work?
Yeah,
How
so
do you become chartered? What's the journey?
It's definitely self-driven. Well, I was going to say it's definitely self-driven. There's two things. You can go and work in a massive consultancy like Atkins or Arup or ACOM, and you can get put on a program, a little bit like if you join the forces and they go, right, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. I didn't want to do that because I felt like it was quite prescribed, and I've also never wanted to be that little cog in that big wheel. I always wanted to have more of an influence and an impact. It was around the fact that I knew that I wanted to have that autonomy, and so I kind of felt like, and career career progression, you know. So I kind of always was was always aiming for like the next step. So it's like, you know, when you do a triathlon, you don't want to get slower, you want to get quicker. And I'm the same in my career. So I when I was a graduate engineer, I wanted to get rid of the title graduate because I felt like it was holding me back. And then I was an engineer, senior engineer. I was like, right, I know that I want to go into management, and you know, that's part of your career progression. So getting chartered was that. So I got chartered in 2011, which basically was 7 years after I graduated.
That's quick. That's quick, is it?
It's about right. It's about right. Like if you went to Arup, you could get fast tracked and do it in 3 years. But I don't feel actually that, to me, that doesn't have the same worth, you know, because you don't have that experience and knowledge to go with it. But if we go through my career path, it all nicely, the qualifications and the career progression and my experience all tied up together in the same way.
Slotted in quite nicely together.
Yeah,
almost.
exactly.
Go on, sorry, go on.
I was just going to ask, how long does it take you to get chartered once you've decided that you're going to?
So it's about a year. It's about a year. So
it's quite a lengthy process, is it?
It is, yeah. And those 13 core objectives, some of them are pretty obvious, like design. Yeah. And then other ones are less obvious, so, you know, like law and some of the stuff that is, you know, still blows my mind now. And, you know, we employ lawyers if we need to and solicitors if we need to, because that's a whole different ball bag. But you just need to have some knowledge around it existing. Okay. And then your interview is kind of where you bring together your portfolio of the projects that you've worked on, and the example how you've obtained those 13 core objectives. And then you kind of get grilled in your interview by two well-qualified structural engineers who tried to falter you, but you know, I was pretty lucky. I had good cop, bad cop.
Nice.
And I liked good cop. He was cool. So you kind of that interview basically is grilled, and at the end of that, they're basically saying we feel like you have enough knowledge and experience to be able to become a chartered engineer, but you then ultimately still have to pass the exam, which has like a 30% pass rate for the first time.
Did you pass first time?
I did.
Well done.
Which is amazing because I sucked at the exams at uni, but I just worked really hard. I revised so much that it was. Did you? You know, I didn't leave any. I just had to do it. It was just like that's what I needed to do. Yeah.
So what? Very simply, then, like, if you could, what are the stepping stones to become chartered? You know, does it start from? I'm guessing it starts from like having, I don't know, A levels, T levels.
Yeah. So you need your degree. Ultimately, how you get to that degree now is changing, and that's what I think is quite exciting. That you know, people who, I would say I'm a late bloomer in terms of like getting qualified and getting my education, and you know, I didn't do A levels then go to uni. I was classified as a mature student, which was ironic because I was very immature. But and I was 21 when I went to uni. So
which is not mature at all, is it?
No, exactly.
Not anymore. No.
Like,
but
so young.
Yeah, but so now and you know, as we said, it kind of just worked really well that it was there, but it wasn't through knowing really what I wanted to do earlier. And we, you know, we've got a T-level student who knows what he wants to do, so he's following a path which is making him more rounder and more giving him like that base knowledge before he's even started his career, which is great because we get graduates who basically start and they don't want to pick up the phone, and I was one of them, and they don't really know how to fully design and understand the parameters around a building and how to design a building. They just understand how to design elements. So
then you do need a degree. Does it have to be, am I right in saying it has to be like an accredited degree for some sort of specific?
Yeah, indeed. So you need a master's degree now as well to get chartered.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And what is the accreditation it needs to be for that course? Is it iStrucD? Is that what it?
No, it's just so it's just MEng, so Masters of Engineering, and obviously it needs to be in civil or structural engineering. But I still don't think they do a degree which is just purely structural engineering. It's still civils, and structures is part of that.
Oh, right.
So as a degree, we were doing like 28 hours a week, which is quite intense for a degree. Like sports is like 8 hours, I think, or something. And I lived with two people doing sports, which was really annoying. Anyway, so yeah, it's that's that.
What advice would you give to somebody who is working towards that chartership?
I think the biggest advice is if you at that point know exactly what you want to do, then kind of look at those core objectives quite early in your career and look at how they're involved and kind of speak to people who have gone through that process. And also you kind of, if you work for a big company who do big reinforced concrete buildings day in, day out, and they design stuff that's in Dubai, you could find yourself the concrete column designer, and that's what we do. And that's what I like about the size of our consultancy, is that it's very blended. There's lots of materials. There's timber, there's masonry, there's steel, there's concrete, and that's just the 4 basic ones. And then you start blending them together, and you get all sorts of different.
There's variety.
Yeah, exactly. So understand like where your strengths are and what you've done, but also what you haven't done.
So you could almost look, like you said, look at those objectives really early on and actually work back. You could sort of plan your career around those sort of things. So like you said, if you're in a company where you can't fulfill those case studies and have all that exposure,
exactly,
you're probably going to struggle a little bit later on.
Yeah, exactly. So the consultancy that I worked in as a graduate, we did lots of residential work with those big house builders like Persimmon and Barrett and Bloor and blah, blah, blah. And so I understood how a house stands up, or a domestic unit, but that is quite a nice basic structure in a way. But fortunately, that consultancy got bought out by a bigger consultancy that did bigger things, and if that hadn't have happened and I'd have just stayed there, I probably would be the best house designer in the world
ever.
But I probably would never have managed to get chartered. So
Right.
if at that point I was stuck in a small consultancy doing that, then I probably would have said to myself, go, you need to go somewhere else. But
so as a graduate engineer, you've done your degree, you've come out of university. What would you expect to do in your first position? What sort of responsibilities? How would you start off?
Yeah, so responsibility is very important, because as a graduate engineer, ultimately you aren't really responsible in a professional term, because you don't have that experience, you don't have that chartership. So if any, and in a legal sense, the only people who have responsibility are the directors.
Okay.
Or any other chartered engineer that has signed off somebody else's work. If we stand up in court because one of our buildings kills somebody, then it's me and in jail, which is quite scary. But at the same time, you don't really get up thinking about that. Yeah, it doesn't happen, because obviously we have quality assurance processes, and we make sure it doesn't happen. So as a graduate, it's kind of.
What would be the first thing you'd sit them down to do?
Yeah, it would be like designing simple structures, basically, simple steel portal frames, or like cow sheds, that kind of thing, and housing it is really good for that. And we that is one of the sectors that we still work in, and based on now 25 or 20-year-old relationships that I've got with some of the same people who still work at those same house builders, effectively, which in a way is nice as well. And I was thinking about what do I enjoy, and relationships is a big part of what I enjoy about my job, which has got nothing to do with structural engineering, really.
That's a big part.
So those graduates really is like understanding what design is about, how processes work, where you can not necessarily take shortcuts, but where you don't need to delve into so much detail and design, and how things fit together. Because I think that the beauty of like this thing sitting on the table and like the BTech,
what a prop by that.
and the mechanical experience that I had was understanding how things fit together. Because ultimately, if you design something that doesn't and can't fit together on site, then it's kind of useless. So understanding those processes.
Okay. So basic structures they can expect to be doing, bit of drawing, designing, that side of things.
Mm.
We probably should have gone through this at the start, but what does a
we
structural
do?
engineer
What does a structural engineer do?
Yeah.
So we get confused with architects quite a lot.
Yeah.
And we go, we're not architects, we're not surveyors, we're engineers, we're proud to be engineers.
Yeah.
So the utopia is that a client has an idea about something that they need to do, and they know roughly what that structure, that building needs to do for them. So it could be a school, and it could be, well, we've got like they're building 2,500 homes out there, so we know that we need to increase by this amount.
Right.
And so it will be, we need this much teaching ability. So with a consultancy that's experienced in doing education, they will know immediately what actually that client needs. And that's one of the biggest things which I was thinking is why StrcutureHaus is successful, is we understand what our clients need, and usually better and more than they do, because without sounding, without sounding silly, is most people don't really actually know what structural engineering does. And actually we're making our business is to make money, because otherwise it isn't a business, but how we make money is by doing structural engineering, and ultimately we're doing something that most people don't really know and really don't really want. They don't want to pay us.
Don't want to pay for it anyway.
No, they don't really want to pay us. So then I was thinking, well, how do I, what's our USP? How do I sell what we do? Because it's like, how do I design a steel beam any different to anybody else? Well, I don't design a steel beam any different to anybody else, because you have to follow the Euro codes, and the Euro codes tells you what numbers and what parameters. So the utopia that I talk about as a structural engineer is that you work with the other disciplines, that being the architect and the mechanical and electrical engineer, and then you think about how the building needs to work and how sustainable it's going to be, or how economic it's going to be. And then the parameters around the building which define how we design it. So the most important thing is the foundations and what it's going to stand on, and it's something that people completely forget. And there's a whole geotechnical engineering is a whole career in itself, and that is the people who tell us structural engineers what is in the ground and how strong it is, and that kind of stuff. And actually in the Southwest we've got some amazing interesting geology, because we've got granites, we've got ex-mining, we've got lots of silts and rivers and all those kind of things. So each site is really different, but you kind of understand, or what it might be in Torquay. So actually slope stability might be an issue, because the cliffs are being lost like day in, day out.
That's where it starts for you guys then, sort of foundations.
Yeah, so the foundations is key. Like if your foundations don't work, then the rest doesn't work. So then you talk about your superstructure, and ultimately there's the things that influence how a building stands up are the imposed loadings, and those imposed loadings are snow, wind, and us, and stuff that we put in this building. So is it a house? So does it just have a family living in it with their wardrobes and their bath and whatever? Or is it a school that's going to have like 30 children all sat on the floor in one area? Or is it a gym where they're going to put like 600 kilos worth of weight? So that's what I mean about different things, and people go, oh yeah,
how it's going to be used.
Yeah, exactly. So those are the parameters that we then start to talk about, but also where is it based? So if it's on the edge of a cliff, then it's going to be a lot windier than it's in the middle of the town. So those imposed loads are around it. But then the collaboration with the architect, and like there's some really nice examples around this room that we can't capture on there, but there's an example that I'm looking at is there's a steel frame which is the whole building, which sits on top of a concrete box in a flood zone. So actually it can still flood, but this guy's house sits out of the flood zone. So we talked to the architect, and we work with the architect in terms of not just designing boxes with little holes, because that's what the structural engineer wants to do, but how can you put that flair in it? How can you make something really interesting and really exciting, and actually something that makes us want to get involved in it? How does it look at the end? Take some of the structures that are around Exeter. You look at all those 60s, 70s buildings, like the old library and some of the other buildings, and you go, oh, there's
a lot of concrete,
and structure engineers were loving life.
Yeah.
Look at the new swimming pool, and it's a beautiful structure.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have worked without an architect, but it wouldn't have worked without a structural engineer.
Yeah.
And often it's that collaboration which is, you know, what we do. So ultimately, what does a structural engineer do? We make sure that structures stay up.
I was just about to say that. I said from that I've got you make buildings stay up.
Yeah.
And then the architects make them look nice.
And
Is that it?
Yeah.
one won't work without the other.
Exactly that. Yeah, exactly that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's your favourite part of the process of building structure?
It is that early part. It's going back to that design, having some influence in the design. It's one of the things which I talk to a lot of our clients about. So we have clients that, you know, our Mr. and Mrs. Smith down the road that just want an extension on the back of their house, or they just or
Do
sometimes
you go that small as well, do you?
Yeah, we do it. Yeah, so again with that, like, we get bored easily. We want to do lots of different stuff because we get bored easily, but actually, again, in like a fluctuating market and the government and, you know, interest rates and everything else, we want to remain as robust as possible, and the two go really nicely hand in hand, you know. But at the same time, just because Mr. and Mr. Smith down the road knock out one wall and need a steel beam, that's really easy for us and it's really boring. But actually, you've just changed somebody's house and you've made their house better for them. And actually, that's kind of nice. That kind of makes you feel pretty good.
Yeah.
Being responsible for buildings that people are educated in makes you feel pretty good. So it's having that, like, ownership of some of the things that, you know, are around. And I drive around the Southwest now. I'm like, oh, that block of flats is there because of me, and that block of flats and the balconies outside it don't have a rainwater pipe because I decided that they could incorporate that into the column, and it looks better. And I'm like, even now, like, that was an idea as a graduate, and I still drive past it now every time I go to Tesco's and go, that's me.
But
so
it's the impact that's made, isn't
exactly.
It? Yeah.
You know, lots of little things, but a big impact.
So as a structural engineer, you can expect to work on anything, the small stuff like houses, new builds, that sort of thing. To, I don't know, the Shard.
Indeed, and people say to me, what do I think about the Shard? And I'm like, well, I like the Shard because it looks like a structure should do. It's wider at the bottom. And then people say, what do you think about the Gherkin? And I think, well, it just looks weird because it's like, but we're not, most of the stuff that we do isn't around that. It's smaller stuff. We're in the Southwest, and we're on a peninsula. But the beauty of that is that my client base goes from like the Isle of Scilly, and they don't even have a structural engineer, and they don't have building control, and they've got like one building company, and everything's really difficult. So the strategics around how you do everything is there. And again, like that, like, what you do is having a bigger effect on them because they don't, you know, there's limited stuff there. And then some of the properties that we do for people who have got a bit more money is really exciting, but also some of the just improving people's homes is kind of nice. But yeah, in the Southwest, it's usually really reasonably small scale stuff, but sometimes quite complex. We do sort of timber frame stuff. We get involved in heritage and planning aspects, and, you know, Part Q, which is kind of turning old agricultural buildings into residential buildings, and because, you know, that's needed. We're doing a project down in Torbay, which is like a 7-story reinforced concrete frame. So, you know, they do exist in the Southwest. And that's for Torbay District Council and helping their housing stock down there. So, you know, they do exist. In my career, I've been involved in the refurb at Exeter Central Library. I've done 2, 3. Yeah, exactly, literally. And I talk about a little project that I'm getting back involved with in that as well. We've been responsible for projects up at the Science Park, and that is like, you know, that's a great addition.
So as I suppose a smaller sort of business, and in the Southwest, you can expect to work on probably the smaller and sort of medium size. Stuff.
So the biggest
can be some bigger stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I think we're probably up to like 20 million is probably where we're at.
Project value.
Or... Yeah, construction value, exactly. And that you get a reasonable amount for 20 million.
It's quite a lot of money, yeah.
Yeah. And
but then I suppose the bigger consultancies, the big players, the big names, like you mentioned, bigger projects more towards London. That's what you.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the slightly defining aspects around those bigger projects is our professional indemnity insurance level, and we cover 5 million. And if you want to do a project that's 20 odd million, they probably want you to have more than that. And our insurance costs quite a lot of money.
Yeah.
So it's like, will we get there one day? Yeah, I reckon so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah.
What's one of the biggest challenges of being a structural engineer?
That's a
If
good
you have
question.
any.
Yeah, I think
It's easy.
probably the biggest. Yeah, no,
There
it's
aren't any.
definitely not easy. I'd say the biggest challenge is understanding. It is like helping people understand why you're making decisions that you're making, and how actually you can have a positive impact on their scheme. So as an example, a project that we worked on recently is a residential scheme in Exeter that's reasonably big, and they had some structural engineers on the first phase, and they didn't really speak to them about how they could make changes to the structures, and they put quite a lot of steel work in there. And I spoke to them at a networking event and said, well, why didn't you do this or this or this? I'm obviously not going to mention any names or anything,
Yeah.
but they were like, oh yeah, we could do that. And actually, architecturally, you were making really small changes, very limited changes, but you were taking a whole load of steel work out. And, steel isn't concrete. It's not that bad, but it's still not perfect. So it's, I get not excited, but I appreciate and enjoy the fact that I can help people build more sustainable buildings by reducing the amount of elements that we design, basically.
Yeah.
So I guess the biggest challenge is helping them understand how you can do that without getting too geeky. And
So you have to be an effective communicator then, I suppose. You have all the ideas in the world, but if you can't communicate that effectively to a client and build those relationships,
I mean,
we're never going to be able to get it across.
Exactly. And when we've been foul of taking on people who are very, very clever as structural engineers, but actually can't communicate with architects and clients, and all of a sudden you end up with them spending lots of time on projects, you getting involved in their projects because they can't communicate, and then all of a sudden actually you don't even make any money. And what's the point?
So just touching on that then, how do you think you've developed those skill sets to be able to do that? I know you said that you were a keen rower at uni. Like, I don't know whether team sports has helped or... I mean, communication is key. How have I got to where I've got? I think it is just experience and exposure to doing more, more projects and working with different people and understanding actually what makes them tick or what doesn't make them tick. And I've been on management courses here and there with part of my old consultancy, and I've had ex-line managers that some are great and some less so. I've had
names.
No names, obviously.
Names.
I've had I've done executive coaching as well, which is kind of like counselling in a term, and it's basically somebody who has learned a lot about how to communicate, and the same as counsellors learn a lot about counselling, but making you realise why your line manager maybe have been as blunt as they were is because actually they aren't really interested in the details because they don't have the capacity to think about that. They just need the answer. But I'm quite I get affected by how people feel. If we have a client that doesn't like what we do, I kind of take that personally. And I think that's probably a good thing, but at the same time I've learnt the older that I get and the more mature and experienced and knowledgeable you kind of think, well, it's not really about me actually, it's about them. And understanding just understanding people, I guess. It's
a good point. It's definitely a good point. Okay, bro, so should we move it on to StrcutureHaus then? We've kind of gone through your journey, how that all started.
Yeah, indeed.
And talk a little bit about StrcutureHaus. So you're obviously director of StrcutureHaus here at Exeter office. You know, we've kind of been through what you guys do, but is there anything to add on to that? You know, in terms of
I mean,
sort of offerings and services, that sort of thing.
Yeah, indeed. So I'll talk a little bit about how I got to the position that then enabled me to join StrcutureHaus to an extent. And basically, that was progressing my career in a consultancy that joined a bigger consultancy that at that time had a joint venture relationship with a local council. So we were doing quite exciting projects, and eventually my position in that consultancy was technical director of structures and civil engineering. And I was responsible basically for signing off the structures and civils for our whole group. And that was nationally. But I became more and more of, even in that position, I still felt like I was too small a cog in that big wheel. And actually, like, I knew more about structural engineering in my consultancy than anybody else did, because it was a multi-disc consultancy. But ultimately, there was beam counters that were making those decisions, and that kind of frustrated me.
Okay, so you're limited a lot by
exactly. And it was all about business cases and numbers and that kind of stuff. And I was like, I want to bring that personal feeling to business as well, because it is about that. You know, ultimately, we sell what we sell because of the people that we have. It's not just numbers. No. It's not just lines. No. So I took a phone call on a day when I was working from home, and it basically said, I've got a guy who owns a consultancy and he's looking for a partner, and he's thinking about his long-term exit plan, but also where StrcutureHaus can go. And so I met Dave Phillips, who's my co-director, and he was in Devon at that time, but had aspirations to move back to London. Don't really understand why, but he, you know,
we want to go back out there.
It's never going to happen for me. I love Southwest.
Devon is heaven.
Exactly. So I met with Dave, and we just hit it off straight away. And he had another 10 years more experience than me, and that excited me that I could learn some more skills from him, because that same boredom thing, it's great to learn. But at the same time, I could have that autonomy. Then COVID happened, and I hate that word. We've almost forgotten about it, right?
Yes.
But it was literally like days after I made an offer, and I kind of panicked a bit. And I worked from home designing stuff on design packages that I hadn't used for a very long time, going, oh my God. But actually, it was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. It was because that break in the industry, kind of a lot of the relationships and clients that I had in my old consultancy kind of migrated across to this consultancy, and there wasn't that awkward, like, well, you've just nicked all of our clients. There was the consultancy that I was in kind of ended up with less ability to service clients outside of their own joint ventures. So it wasn't even, it was amicable, and I spoke to them.
Quite a lot of limitations there as well for you, it sounds like, in terms of BD and projects you can work on, though.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're tied, your hands are tied by that. Yeah.
So, and that, again, it was like, I spent a lot of time doing spreadsheets to work out how we should pull together like fee proposals and all that kind of stuff. And I'm, even to this day, doing a fee proposal is pretty boring. It's like, it's very important, clearly, but it's not the
best thing about it.
It's not one of the jobs. Yeah, it's not the part of the job that I love. It's just, where'd you go? It's like, it's just
a lot of admin. Is it more the administration side, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, if you get it wrong, then you've lost a load of money on a job, then that sucks, because what was the point? But also, if you get it wrong and you go too high and then you don't win the job, then that sucks, because who doesn't like winning? So it's each time is finding that.
How do you find that balance?
Experience again, and kind of that in itself has grown quite a lot since I've been at StrcutureHaus, because we're doing smaller projects in StrcutureHaus than I was in my old consultancy. So I was fee quoting like massive jobs, and it was more about construction builds and percentages of that basically. So these spreadsheets were just
numbers.
About numbers, exactly. You know, I love numbers. Obviously, who doesn't?
You got to.
Yeah, exactly. But fee quoting now, there is some personal aspect in it as well, because you know sometimes you can put the extra carrot in there, and sometimes you don't really want to, and sometimes actually you get quite personally attached to a project, and you feel like you really want it to work for them, so you kind of put in a bit of your own extra effort every so often, just because of them, and you know how you're having a good effect on their life, I guess.
With your sort of, you know, fee structures and pricing, where do you put yourself? I don't know if you're able to say, but
absolutely, it's a great question.
Like more of the quality and charge more sort of thing. How do you work it out?
We go on quality for sure, but we're not reassuringly expensive at the same time. So we want the quality, and StrcutureHaus is proud of the quality that we have. So we price that in. And we're open and honest about that, and we say, look, you know, you can probably get it cheaper somewhere else, but maybe going cheaper somewhere else might cost you like 3 times more in steel.
Yeah.
So
would it allow you more time as well to put effort into it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's the point. But then also, you know, with that tiered, what we just talked about, the tier level is like you can't just use a cheaper graduate and then just chuck it out the door, because that's unprofessional. Obviously, you need like different levels. So we have sort of mentoring, and we have sign-off levels and that kind of aspect. So all of those things need to come into that fee quote. And obviously, you have administrators, and we've got lights above our heads, and a building that we need to keep warm and all that kind of stuff.
And I suppose that's down to like the relationships, again, going back to that, the ones that you've built with your clients, for them to understand.
Yeah, exactly. So so as a great example, some of the clients are now friends, you know, and some of them are really close friends, you know, and so it's almost like they kind of know what you're going to charge, because you carry on charging, and you have a discussion each year about rise of, you know, cost of living and blah, blah, blah. But you just keep that relationship open, and then every so often they go, well, we've got a project that actually we need it to be a bit tighter. And you go, okay, that's fine, we'll do it a bit tighter. And then they go, but on the flip side, we've got a project here where there's loads of money. So, you know, take a little bit extra for yourself. So that is definitely a bad relationship.
What sort of percentage of your work is, you know, repeat business, and how much is it stuff that you're actually going out there and trying to generate more?
It's probably at least 80%, and that is and that's right, that's varied. So we, as examples off the top of my head, we've got like architects that we work with in Torquay that almost literally don't even need to move out of Torquay in terms of their own work, because they just do those nice resi projects, and the people who are doing that house will first go to the architect because they know they need an architect, and then the architect will say, you need a structural engineer. I go, what's that?
What do they do?
They'll say, well, we know ones that we will
listen to the Konker podcast with Mark.
Exactly. In the future we'll just go, I'll send them a link.
Just send them a link.
But yeah, we'll basically they'll say we work with these guys, it'll be Mark, or we'll work with StrcutureHaus. We'll get them to fee quotes, we'll send out a reasonable fee quote, and then they'll just engage us, and that'll be that. And
so
then
a lot of the relationships are sort of architects, recommendations.
So they are
clients.
So some are architects, and then some are companies who put PVs on roofs and they need structures being checked. Some, a lot are with councils. We work with, you know, I can mention councils. So we work with Exeter City Council. We work with East Devon. We work with North Devon. We do lots of projects in Torbay, but we don't necessarily work with them as a council. And then I still, because of my old consultancy and my relationships that I have with them, and they're they don't have a big enough structure team now to fulfill those. So that's now one of my clients is my old colleagues, which is perfect, because I didn't leave because of the projects and the people that I was working with day in, day out. So we've just more recently, we've done an extension at Axminster School. We've done, and we're doing one at Sidmouth School, and we're doing another one at Loddeswell School. So, you know, lots of schools in Devon.
Back to my roots.
Exactly.
Sidmouth College?
It's the one that's been empty for ages. the school. It's not the college. It's one of the schools. So they've got 3 different sites. The school.
Oh yeah.
And Mansstone has been
school.
Yes. So they pulled that out, and I'm gonna say Midas because they've gone bust. Were about to start on site, and then they went bust, and it's sat empty for a year.
Right.
So that project's been rejuvenated, and again, it's like we're going to be responsible for that school coming back to life.
That's quite an impactful thing to have for a community. Definitely.
Yeah, exactly. And then we work with contractors and companies that basically just do small maintenance stuff. So, but then that leads on to bigger projects. So that's kind of it. Lots of different client bases. Way too many. When we first talked about doing this podcast, I thought, well, it'd be good for me to do some research about our stats. Yeah. And so I, through the program that we use to monitor our projects, I thought I'll see how many ongoing projects we've got. And bear in mind, we've got 18 kind of on the books staff. Yeah. It was 650 live projects.
Wow.
So yeah.
That's low.
Yeah.
Do you know, if you'd asked me that question and I sort of have a bit of an understanding of how these businesses work, that sort of thing, I would never have guessed anywhere near that.
That's what I should have done. I should have.
You should have
missed that opportunity.
That is mental. But like, how long are these projects taking?
Yeah. So a live project, it could be open for a couple of months, and it could be open for a couple of years.
Is it?
So anything in between. Anything in between. But obviously, those projects that are open for a couple of months, that they close within a couple of months. Yeah. So we tend to generally, each engineer will, depending on the size of that project, they'll work on anything from like 20 to 60 projects each.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah, where architects will work on like a third of that. Yeah. So, and one of the biggest downfalls of it is the email traffic that's associated with it, but we won't even get into that conversation.
Well, there's a lot of administration behind all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
you can't remember everything of each design as well, can you?
So many times do I get a number that I'm like, I don't recognise that, and then they go, oh, it's the builder here at 15 Harris Street, and we're just putting steel A in, and we can't work out this, and you're like, whoa, go back.
Reverse.
So
did you have to rush down there for something like that, or you've got a tracking system where you jump in and look at all what's going on?
Yeah, so so we work off Dropbox, and we have, so technology-wise, we can all work from home. We've all got all the latest design packages, and we work off Dropbox online, basically. So, and each project has a job number, and the next one is 1+, the last one, if that makes sense. Yeah. So it's what was the project number? Yeah. What is the drawing number? Yeah. And then we pop that up while we're on the phone and go from there, really.
Right.
So what software and sort of technology are you utilising at the moment then?
So software side for structural engineering. So what I talked about earlier was the materials that we use. And those materials, they haven't changed like for a really long time. Trees have never actually changed, and timber is trees. So we're still designing, ultimately we're still designing the very basis of the elements of those materials in exactly the same way we were. Some of the codes that we used that were British standards were from like 1974. And before that, they were just knocking stuff up and it was standing up. So when I was a graduate, we were using, mainly it was when you had things that were part of then a structure or a frame or something like that. So we were using software that built parts of the building, but it was only ever in 2D. Okay. So you would take a slice of a structure and then you would design it in 2D in this thing called A3D Max at the time. And then from that, we would then go back down to our basis of just pen on paper, basically. That pen on paper now, we've got this package called TEDS, and most structural engineering firms are now using it because it has a reasonable cost and it is able to design all these different elements on their own, and it can take into things like the moment on it and the torsion on it and the compression and tension. So it thinks about the material, how the material is being affected. So that's TEDS. Then
What does TED stand for? Sorry.
Not a clue.
It's just TED.
It's just TED.
That is a strange one, isn't it?
It is a strange one. Yeah, and then the funny thing is they put their own logo in they have like a calc sheet that gets printed out, and they put their logo, but we changed that to our StrcutureHaus. But and every consultancy does it, and you go, they're using TED. But the good thing is that at least you know that if another consultancy using it, you know where to look to make sure, like if you're checking somebody else's work, you know where to check what parameters they've put in to quickly say, because TEDS doesn't get it wrong, we get it wrong. You know, we might put the wrong stuff in basically, and that would design like elements, but those elements could actually be structures themselves. It could be a retaining wall, and it would design that so you effectively build up a retaining wall in the package, and then it says actually it's not going to work. It's going to fall over or it's going to slide. And within that, you put the parameters of like the soils that are underneath the retaining wall and behind the retaining wall. So that's one example of how TEDS works. Kind of slightly more exciting than TEDS is a package that we called it's called Tekla, and Tekla works with Revit, and it's 3D, and it basically builds up the whole thing. So Revit is a drawing package, and Tekla is a designing package. Revit is used by all the disciplines. So the architect will start to build up the building, the structure in Revit, and then you can draw that across to the structural element, and then you can push that into Tekla, and then that starts to look at the building as a whole. So if you're designing a building that's like 20 odd stories high, it'll tell you what the forces are going that whole way through that whole building. So buildings like the Burj and those that we talked about earlier, they wouldn't even have existed really without modern technology and the design packages that we have now. And they still would have used, like, you know, they probably did use Tekla. That there are other packages that are similar, but they all do the same thing. When you design concrete, you do something which is called finite element design, and Tekla has that built into it. So you start to analyze different parts of the slab. So if you imagine yourself in a car park, an undercroft car park, and you see these columns, you know the columns are holding the floor up, and then so on and so forth. But obviously the column on the bottom is holding all those other ones up. So the one on the top is only holding up one floor, but the one on the bottom could be holding up 10, 20. So it will tell you that each column needs to get bigger and bigger, and what reinforcement needs to go in that. Tekla and Revit are like our biggest and best tools, and they both are tools which enable you to do a project through a process which is called BIM, which is Building Information Modeling. And so if the government are funding a project, so like say one of Devon County Council schools, if that project construction cost is over £5 million, then the government say it has to use the BIM process.
Oh really? Why is it?
Because it automatically brings in that quality and that aspect. Yeah, and a really great example is when myself and an ex-colleague who was a mechanical engineer in World Consultancy, so James Laughlin of SDS, we were sat on a train going up to our directors meeting in London, and we had our Revit models on our iPads, and he said, "Oh look, my your foundation is exactly where like my mechanical ventilation pipe is going through. So your foundation's the wrong way." And I'm like, well, no, it means yours is the right way. But ultimately, that's the kind of thing that, and on drawings and on separate 2D drawings, it's really difficult to see that kind of stuff. So for clash, it's called clash analysis effectively. So it's great for that aspect, but then furthermore and more exciting for people who are going to like purchase and buy or are even funding these buildings is that they can get an image of what it's going to look like, and you can render that. Okay. So you can exactly with
all the details.
Yeah, exactly. So you can kind of go like, this is what your building looks like, but then you can take that one step further and you can actually do like a tour through what you're building. Wow. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So once you've built up this full Revit model that's got like the architecture in it, the structure and the mechanical and electrical systems that go in there. You can even start furnishing it and putting a bit of FF&E in there, so you can kind of go what colour schemes you're going to use. I mean, I'm less excited about what the sofas look like and the tiles, but but as a project, it's really great. And some of the house builders are doing it for their site. You know, some of the bigger architect firms in Exeter are working with those house builders, and they're going, what's our whole site going to look like? Because ultimately, if you're buying a house, you can easily see what your house is going to look like, but how's it going to look? Well, how's my estate going to feel when I drive into it? That kind of stuff. So, Revit and Tekla is kind of up there at the moment with what we're doing and enabling us to kind of break the boundaries a little bit without going backwards and over engineering and using those materials that we don't want to use too much of again.
That's good. So StrcutureHaus, what would you say you guys do really well? You know, it's a really difficult question to answer sometimes, isn't it? Because I'm kind of asking, you know, what's the USPs? You know, why you guys? But what do you guys do really well as a business, do you think? Yeah,
and I touched on it earlier a little bit and basically said, you know, you could say that every structural engineer does things exactly the same way because that's how you design it to that code or you use that bit of software. But you don't do that, and I think our USP is understanding the client. I think that's the most important thing, and understanding what they actually really want, because sometimes they don't fully understand what they want, or they definitely don't understand the implications of what they want and actually how making small tweaks could save them a whole load of money. And I make a joke about it, and I just say, look, I will ensure that you'll spend less money on the steelwork or the concrete or the timber, and then you can spend that money on your gold tap. And they go, oh, I want a gold tap. So it's jovial, obviously, but it kind of works because people go, oh yeah, I don't really want to spend my money on the stuff that isn't going to exist. But then sometimes we work on structures where actually the structure is the art. You know, just taken on a commission with North Devon Council and Ilfracombe Harbour. So it's kind of getting quite a bit of, well, has been getting press over the last few years with Damon Hirst's monstrosity there. You get like Americans coming over to look at this thing, right? Yeah. But the first thing you do when you come into the harbour is you see these, like, we used to see these weird concrete, tiny little buildings that used to exist because that was how they used to sell the shipping tickets, and they were like the ticket shops or whatever they call them. But they had this historical clock on above one of them, which is now listed, and they want to reuse that and put that in the harbour. So an architect has created this like beautiful kind of like structure that is literally just going to hold this one clock up, and that's its main purpose. So it's not, I'm not designing that because it's going to purpose somebody's life or anything like that. It will be art, you know. So that's, you know, and bridges and, you know, other things that we do. We've done projects where looking at one behind you, which again isn't on the camera, but is we did a project at Branscombe where somebody was kind of getting too close to the edge of the cliff and they wanted to take it out. So we've kind of timber cladded in different ways, like they're cantilevering structure out of the cliff, and it's just looks cool. We've done projects in Ireland where we've got like external staircases that go around cliffs that are bolted back. So there's sometimes it can get quite exciting and you can be breaking the boundaries, but you get that comfort in those design packages that I talked about before, and then using other professionals like, you know, the geotechnical engineers and that kind of stuff.
That's good.
So what is the process you have with your clients to build those relationships then? Yeah, so I think with the repeat business and those repeat clients, then it's having that ongoing relationship and talking to them in the first instance. So you know, I won a house building client by having a conversation at a networking event by saying, have you thought about making that masonry pair slightly longer so that you don't have to put like a wind post or a steel stability post in there? And they go, no, we didn't really think about that, and our current structural engineer didn't even say that. So that won me a client, but then I continue to do those kind of things with that same client to say, well, what is your objective? What are you trying to do?
Because if you don't understand what your client is trying to do, then you can't really help them in the best way. So it's just that ongoing relationship and understanding and knowing each other more and more,
Yeah.
I guess that's about it, really.
Just clear lines of communication.
Absolutely, yeah. And I guess them understanding that whilst you exist because you're a business and you want to make money, that's not the drive.
Yeah.
That's good. Another tricky question here.
Go on.
What haven't you done so well, do you think? Is there anything which you guys are trying to work on?
That's a good question. What hasn't gone so well? What don't?
It's tough.
It is tough. And I even considered an answer, and I was like, I finally have an answer when I was thinking about this before, and now it's completely gone.
It's one of those where, like, it's really, I suppose it's tough to know these things, isn't it? Because you've got to be really honest with yourself and, honest with everything in the full picture. But then once you actually get that and you are honest with it, this is the sort of thing you can easily work towards.
Yeah, I guess as a director, then I can say, what have I learned in terms of things that I've seen around me and what's gone wrong and what near misses perhaps, and stupid things like I talked about understanding the parameters, and when I was a graduate, the checking process wasn't quite what it was today, and I designed a pad stone. So a pad stone is a bit of concrete that you put into a brick or blockwork wall so that it's stronger in that one place, so that a steel beam that has quite a lot of load on it can spread that load out a little bit more onto the masonry below. I designed a pad stone that was almost a structure in itself. It was like 1,200, it was 2 meters wide, I think. So when we went on site, this wall almost was a concrete wall. So I definitely would always say because that's happened to me, I'd always say to graduates, how look at that pad stone and actually does it really make sense? And now I'm thinking of other examples of near misses. So as again, quite early in my career, I got interviewed by the HSE, which is the Health and Safety Executive. So they don't get involved in anything until there's either been an incident or a near miss. Okay. So it was on a Monday morning, and I got this phone call saying a balcony that you've designed has collapsed, and I was like, I know. I mean, I won't swear, but I was panicking.
Yeah.
I was panicking big time.
Well, yeah, that's the call that
nobody
engineer wants
to
get. Surely that is the call, isn't it?
Because that's the penultimate. That's the fail. That's like something's happened. So there was on this balcony was 3 guys, all quite sizable guys apparently. One went immediately to hospital. One went to hospital that night, and the other one escaped hospital. But they were all fine. But it was still a big panic. Was this balcony? So it was. Fortunately, it was on the 2nd story. It wasn't any higher than that. And I obviously went back to my design, and I was like, what have I done? What's gone wrong? And fortunately, I hadn't done anything wrong. But I could have done more, perhaps, and I could have told more about what I was doing, and it's something that in terms of CDM and construction design management and health and safety that we do now. So what they did was they put all the fixing of the floor in, but they didn't put the fixing of the handrail in. So, and the handrail obviously with the cantilever is the thing that holds it back, and they did that on a Friday, and then on the Monday morning, some people came in to fit the glass, and the whole thing, there wasn't enough stability of structure there. So that sticks with me now, and I kept that. So telling the story of what you need to do. So now we do designers risk assessments all the time. So simple things like if I'm going to design something up at height, maybe there's ways around maintaining it, that kind of stuff. So, and again, those core objectives that to get you chartered do that. So, yeah, those things definitely didn't go well. Sometimes miscommunication.
Yeah. It's quite an interesting takeaway, isn't it? Because you sort of told 2 stories there, and I've taken 2 things out of that. Is don't over-engineer and don't under-engineer. It's quite it's quite a fine line, isn't it, between the two? Sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. You can make assumptions, and in fact, that's even more recently. I kind of had a mishap on a project where when you design elements, you take like an average length of it and you design it to that length, and if it goes up or down by a few hundred mil, then it doesn't really have much of an impact on the design. But obviously that steel beam needs to fit between those two walls that are at the end of the other wall that's been knocked out, as an example. So I gave these calcs to just some local people, and all happy. This was great, but it was during COVID times, and I assumed that they were going to use a builder. And I assumed that the builder would measure up and know what they're doing.
You just think that is the
You would, right?
Yeah.
And this is like, what, 18 years into my career, because I've never once had I ever said to somebody, don't go and buy some steel yourself. These people bought the steel for themselves and had it in their kitchen for like months before they even got a builder. And then the builder gets there and was like, well, these steels aren't long enough. Who measured it? And they're like, well, Structure Engineer. I'm like, well, I didn't measure it for an installation. I measured it for a design. Yeah. So now, obviously, whenever I do a one beam for one Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I say to them, make sure that somebody knows what they're doing. Obviously not quite as layman as this, but make sure you get a competent contractor and make sure that everything is measured on site. Yeah. So still learning actually.
That is interesting, isn't it? That is interesting.
I got an answer as well.
You got an answer?
I got an answer out of that.
What are the plans for the business over the next few years? Are there expansion plans?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. And I think I'm really proud of what we do, and that has become apparent in just our turnover and the amount of projects that we worked on, and so that gives me the confidence to say that what we're doing well. Yeah. So on that same basis, it's like, well, if we're going to do well, expansion is just like a natural progression of that. But we want it to be a controlled expansion, a natural expansion. So I touched on Exeter being like our engineering hub, and actually London is mostly Dave and the support of several engineers here who go up to London, and that long term isn't sustainable. But it's a really important part of our income and our business. So the next step basically is getting somebody in London that can then help us build that team in London. So we have started interviewing, so that's exciting.
That's good.
We met this French guy who's got a PhD who's like super intelligent.
Yeah.
So and interestingly, what has worked on some crazy big stuff over in America and Dubai, and he works for an American company, and he said, I'm fed up of being that small cog in that big wheel. Yeah. So, which is great. I was like, as soon as you said that, I was thinking, ching.
Yeah.
We've just taken on Paul Stansby as associate here, because we recognise that we want that, again, that progressive growth, but also somebody who's got the same experience that we've got, but can sit out there with a team like day in, day out, because as a director, you quite often sometimes are too stressed to answer questions that you don't want to answer at that point.
What you would consider the smaller stuff, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So having Paul here is perfect, and Paul may or may not be part of the expansion of StrcutureHaus, but we've definitely talked about it. So first port of call is build that London office, and then just see where we go from there. Yeah, not make too scary big plans, but definitely enjoy the ride that we're on, because
organic growth.
Organic, that's the word, which I use every time I talk about it. Yeah. Couldn't find right now.
with a business like yours, then, bit of a chicken and egg question, but does the work come first and then you find the engineer, or do you have to have the capacity to be able to do the work and then the work?
Do you know what that is? Yeah, that's a great question. So we've just gone through our appraisals this year, so we do them annually. It's nothing too formal, but at the same time it's important. And the biggest thing that came out of that was, before you got Paul, we were all really stressed, and we felt like we were overworked. And as a boss, you kind of go, that kind of sucks to hear. You don't want you want people to be proud of what they do and come into work, but at the same time you don't want them stressed. Stress is horrible. Sure. we'd already recognised that, so it was no surprise to us to get there, to get to hear that, and we've already put things in place to kind of remedy that exactly. Yeah. But it kind of, going back to the question, ultimately it's like we're taking a bit of leap of faith here and there, but at the same time, we are looking at numbers, and we do have a business plan, and we do review that between myself and Dave, and consider whether we can and can't. So I just alluded to earlier, we've taken on a T-level student, and he's free, so he's great. But actually, he's kind of, in a flip side, it's a future plan with that, and it's us having relationships with the college, because it is a drain on resource in terms of you obviously we give our time to him. We've just started talking to a chap who does the apprenticeships at Exeter University, and we're very definitely going to take on an apprenticeship this year as well.
National Apprenticeship Week this week as well.
Oh wow, there we go. Perfect timing. So, and then just go from there. So in terms of like the tiered aspect that I talked about earlier, it's like we'd then have like a T-level, an apprentice, a couple of grads who are moving out of that grad position now, a couple of engineers, a senior engineer, an associate engineer, and a principal engineer, and then us two directors. So it's important to have that. Because I think it's good for those other people that sit in the business and go, well, I like what StrcutureHaus do, and I like who I work for, hopefully. Fun later. But I want some career progression. I don't want to feel like I have to move because I'm not got that career progression. So I think building it does that for our people.
I think we all know as well, like, it's so difficult to find like skilled engineers. It's so difficult to find like chartered engineers, isn't it? It is really high in demand.
Crazy difficult. Yeah, I've challenged you guys a few times, I think, haven't I?
I think we failed on most of it. but it's one of those where the businesses that grow the most and the quickest are the ones that are able to bring on their own talent and nurture their own talent. And if you've got such good connection with the college and apprenticeships,
that's us kind of thinking about that future, really. But again, like relationships, Paul wasn't looking for a job. I offered him one. So it was it's good when you know people in the industry.
When it is such a tight industry.
And it really is. It is. And in a weird way, like, I don't want to start. I wouldn't go out and say to a recruit, go and speak to that guy who's already working happily over there, because that's another business. The relationships need to be in the industry at the same time. I think.
Sure. Definitely get that. What are the biggest lessons you've learned over your, maybe we could say over your career? Or even over your time sort of at StrcutureHaus with running a business? You could split that up in two answers, really.
I think probably the biggest thing that I've learned, and again, I don't want to keep hitting the same drum in terms of communication, but ultimately communication and understanding are it, but also understanding how the built industry is changing, and it is. Buildings are becoming, thankfully, more sustainable. We're talking about embodied carbon and all that kind of stuff. So understanding and appreciating that you definitely don't know everything. There's always time. There's lots to learn, but also recognize what you do know and kind of and help other people in this team and our clients understand what that is and share that knowledge, I think.
How is sustainability sort of changing your business or having an impact on the environment?
The
built environment side.
It's having the biggest impact. It's impacting different sectors in different ways. So talking about the resi aspect, then it keeps making that cavity wall even wider and wider and wider because they just make it. And in which case you kind of go, well, is masonry and brickwork, is that now the best material for those houses? Because actually you're starting to pull two leaves further and further apart. And then when you have openings, the support of the masonry above that opening is becoming more and more challenging to get around, and thermal bridging is harder to combat. So when you've got like bolt-on balconies and canopies and all that kind of stuff, so it's affecting that side of things. But then in terms of other projects, then people's immediate reaction is, well, it's got to be timber then. Let's do wood, because trees grow, but they don't just grow. It's not like
takes
there
a while
isn't
for them to grow.
Yeah, they take a really long time to grow, and they have restrictions around them. So actually, timber in itself is probably the most over-designed material, because actually it's the most natural material. So therefore, it has a lot of defects in it. So the factors of safety that you put on the design of that material is huge. So I think that the sustainability will have the biggest effect will be on how those different materials interact and compositely work together, and picking the right material and understanding the right material. And that's where I think the future of structural engineering will go, and the use of like those computer programs is, I've got my parameters and I understand the connections, but what really is the right material? And sometimes it might even be concrete, as horrible as concrete is,
there's a perception, isn't there, with concrete? People
there
don't
is.
want it and like it from, I don't know, 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Like other examples, and some of the bits that I picked up when I was sitting in on the T-level students' final assessment, and their presentation was that they were like, oh, well, this needs to be sustainable, so we're going to put a green roof on it. And I'm like, okay, so that's cool. What's that going to do? They're like, well, the biodiversity, it will bring all the bees in and all this kind of stuff. And you're like, awesome, it will. But how does it affect the structure? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, you've just stuck like a really heavy thing on your roof. And actually that's just made the materials in the building and the embedded carbon in that building has just increased by 20% because you've put that on there. And
there's
they're like,
so many things to consider.
Oh yeah. So again, it's like exactly. There's so many things to consider, and I think those kind of things, they're quite exciting to consider. It's nice like having that effect and thinking about that, and again, like variety and things changing.
It's quite a big problem as well, isn't it? I suppose to solve.
It is
exciting big problem to solve, because there's a lot of combination and sort of collaborating with other disciplines.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And again, like I talked about collaboration with the architect and mechanical and electrical engineer and the structural engineer, but actually we haven't talked about like the landscape. We haven't talked about like the interior designer and all that kind of stuff. And then not just how's your building going to look, but what are the size of like the windows? Because like, not necessarily a lesson that I've learned, but I've been to schools where they've gone, well, let's just stick loads of roof lights in, and then it will be like the natural environment, and it'll be ideal to teach in. And then on day one, the sun comes through that roof light straight onto the whiteboard or their screen or whatever, and they're like, oh, great. So they then paint them all black. And I'm like, well, yeah,
time and money.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I like the fact that we're talking about sustainability and carbon and that aspect, because it's important. They are concrete. I found this fact out not so long ago, but concrete is the biggest resource after water that is used, or biggest material or element, if you like, that is used in the whole world.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is crazy.
Blew my mind.
Yeah.
And then you think that concrete has water in it as well. You're like, wow.
Yeah.
So yeah, that I think it is having an effect.
And are you having more of these conversations now because of all these sort of net zero targets? Is it something which you're advising upon more and more and more?
Indeed, yeah. So some of our work stream is coming through Exeter City Council, trying to meet their net carbon targets, and that is putting PVs on some of the local structures around that we will do our shopping in, and go swimming in, and catch buses on. So yeah, it's getting us work in that respect, but it is also going back to that USP of I want to help you say talk about money, because then that like excites them more first.
Yeah.
And then obviously make them realize that actually like less money means less material, actually means less embedded carbon as well,
Yeah.
Are you finding more people are coming to you with the sustainability as a priority?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the sectors that I've worked in for a really long time is effectively the putting PVs and carports and those kind of things onto existing structures, and then going through checking the analysis of those structures. And I've done it for such a long time that I can kind of understand how that can affect a structure, but also understand that when it doesn't work on a structure, how you can potentially get it to work by either making minor changes to the existing structure or adding limited material that then means that actually you can take that extra weight, as an example. So that, it started off with one firm, and then that got us working with another firm, and then they talked to somebody else, and that in itself has probably been the biggest growth for sure in terms of like our work stream.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
It's interesting how those sort of new renewables sectors will open a lot of more jobs when a lot of the other ones will close down as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay. What advice would you give to somebody who's thinking about starting structural engineering or wants to become a structural engineer?
Yeah, so I think we touched on it before already, I think, but just speak to the right people, understand what the career path could be, and what parameters around that can enable or enhance that. Think about how you can get the knowledge base there, and work with different materials and how best to do that. And if you can do that in the Southwest, then you can do that anywhere, because we're on this peninsula that I talked about before, and it's we're not in London. We don't do that kind of work, but you don't need to.
No.
So yeah, just understand a career path, and kind of get that experience and understand that knowledge, and speak to the right people.
So you obviously work with the colleges, the schools, all that sort of thing. Could people come to you?
Yeah,
and have a chat with you. You can put them on the right sort of route.
So we've currently we've got through one of the architects that we work with in London, her daughter is interested in the industry, so she's currently just sat in her London office following Dave around and getting experience, and so absolutely open to that. We have work experience students at least a couple of times a year, I think, doing a project at the moment with Exeter Central Library in relation to the Children's Library, and I've got involved the original the original architect who was involved in the refurb that we did back in 2014. And whilst that seems quite recent, actually the Children's Library isn't necessarily working for them as well as that they want it to, but at the same time there isn't a crazy amount of money to do it. So we've created like a little project that we're going around to schools. So in a couple of weeks, I'm going to St. Peter's School and working with some of their learners that are doing craft design and technology, or whatever it is now called nowadays. It's not called that, but so yeah, talking to those different people, different learners.
Cool.
Yeah.
I suppose it's great advice for anyone, isn't it? Really trying to get into an industry, actually understand exactly what it is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like we said right at the beginning, is that I didn't even know that structural engineering existed. And you guys know limited about what structural engineer does. Hopefully you know a little bit more now. But ultimately it's like, how does a 15-year-old know that they want to be a structural engineer when they don't really know that it exists? So it's just getting more exposure of our industry, full stop, and some of the stuff that we do in terms of our own LinkedIn and our own Instagram is just showing the more exciting side of what we do, and why we do what we do and why we get out of bed, really.
Definitely. Yeah, I get that. Big question then. This is quite a big one. The whole sort of second part of the podcast.
Yeah.
How do you define success? We've spoken about your journey.
Yeah.
What does success look like?
It's a Ferrari. No, it's not. It's not. It's not at all. So I have never been driven by money. It's never been about money, but ultimately we will need that. But it's not the biggest driver. So the thing that keeps me going is that ownership and excitement of seeing projects that I've been responsible for, and then understanding how I've had an influence on that overall structure being better, I think, and working. And I think I alluded to it before, is like building homes, as mundane as that might be, it still is it's something that becomes somebody's home.
Yeah.
You know? It's like, it's called a house, and then people make it their home. But if we didn't have that ability to put it there in the first place, so success to me looks like that progressive and organic growth that we talked about earlier. That to me is how I feel like I'm succeeding. When I go to networking events and people say, "Oh, I can see some of the stuff that you're doing. I can see that like you're interested in it." That is success. Seeing the projects go up is success. Having happy clients and getting positive feedback, that's success.
Yeah.
That's
good.
Ultimately, it's doing my job well.
Yeah. Seeing how impactful your actual work is to clients, whether it's somebody, like you say, turning a house into a home, or something a lot bigger, or a school where it has that massive impact on hundreds of people over a lifetime. Yeah. How would you define success on a personal level?
That's a great question. And I think I've always, and sometimes I allude to it in some of like my LinkedIn things, is I separate my personal life and my working life, because then if one is tougher, then you can rely on the other. And that's definitely worked. I've had challenging times in my life, and you go, well, let's push on making my career and put my energy, my focus in doing that well, because if this part isn't doing as well, then that's fine. So for me, ultimate success is just happiness, basically. Because unfortunately I'm separated, so I have stress around having children, some of the time. I'm in a relationship, so that can be stressful, we all know that. I'm a director of a business that is thankfully doing well, and that isn't without
still comes with
its own stress.
Yeah.
Exactly. How do I unwind is kind of ironic, because that then is doing something which I then want to get better at. So again, progression is there. That's what keeps me going, really, I think.
So what does make you happy? What's happiness to you?
I think happiness is seeing my children grow up and do well, is being in a relationship that is great, and knowing that I am making somebody else's life better, but they're also making my life better. And it's enjoying and being successful at all those things that you talked about at the very beginning, like jumping on a paddleboard and going. I mean, surfing's my biggest love. So getting like, those big waves and the kind of the risk and thrill of that aspect that I wouldn't put into my business. And then finally, just seeing the business do well. So I think it's like, bottom line is, I think that I'm a reasonably nice person, and I think that I strive to make other people's lives better, and kind of have a positive effect on my surroundings, I guess. I'm going to leave it at that.
That's a lovely way to conclude.
Yeah. Well, you I mean, we know each other. You have a pretty good work-life balance, don't you?
It's all right.
Sure. You do a lot outside of work. We've alluded to it. You can't stay still.
No. Exactly. So it's funny. So somebody said to me the other day, they were like, I look at your Strava and I don't understand how you get up at 6 o'clock every morning at 5:30. And I'm like, mate, I have to, because otherwise it doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, it's the most awesome way to start your day, is knowing that the thing that makes my stress level reduce is that exercise aspect. So if I start, if that's where you like your limit is, and if I start off like, or that's like 0. If I start off down here before I've even got into the office, then that's got to be a great way to start. So actually, yesterday I came to the office really bubbly, really great. I just knocked out some lamps in the pool and was pleased with my time. And then I was like, welcome to the next day. Good to go. Yeah, exactly.
No, that's great. Cool. Well, that's a nice definition there we've got.
That is a lovely definition.
And I think we almost define happiness as well.
Yeah.
Well,
slightly different.
I'm going to put that on a t-shirt.
So we're just going to move on to some short and sharp little questions here. But first of all,
Scary.
I just want to draw our eyes to the fantastic JCB that we've got in front of us. And earlier, before the cameras were on, you did mention that this actually has a significant impact on why you're a structural engineer now.
I did, yeah.
So I was wondering if you could just talk us through the story.
Yeah, so here it is. It's a JCB. It's not a tractor, as it's already been called for a couple of times there. So I was about 12, I reckon, something like that. And this was my Christmas present. And I built it on Christmas Day. Took me the whole day, and it's pneumatic, so it has a pump at the front, and then it puts pressure into these, and then it kind of all of this like works with the switches. I forgot about it, and a few years went by, not too many, but a few years went by, and I was actually on the Isle of Scilly a couple of years ago, and I walked into this guy's lounge, and he had one of these on the shelf, and I was like, oh my God, I love that. I used to have one, and it reminded me that I had one. So I spoke to my dad, and he was like, oh, I've got a bag of bits in the loft, and he still had the instructions, and then he had like, as you can now see by its multicoloredness, which doesn't
bit of mix and match
doesn't affect anything other than the color, is a lot of bits were missing. So it became like a project that actually went on for like nearly a couple of months, me resourcing all these extra historical bits. Historical, that makes me sound really old. Retro, that's cooler. Retro parts. And then it's now sat in my office, and every time I'm on a video conference, it's in the background, and so many people say, oh, I like your JCB, that's cool. And so I started in a weird way thinking about this JCB more than I probably should. And did it have an influence on my life? And I reckon actually, in a really weird way, it has, because it's that thing about design and putting things together and how they work. And whilst I said I didn't want to be a mechanical engineer, the mechanics around it and, how it works. So, yeah, that's it. That's my JCB.
That's what started the fire,
indeed,
for you to become an engineer.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's quite interesting, isn't it? Because we're telling like the stories of people's journeys. We've got a real big part of the journey for you here, and you've actually still got it.
Yeah, an actual example of lots of different elements, tiny little elements, all put together that then make a structure.
Yeah.
And one of the other things that I really like about it now is that I could only find green bits on the roof, and it does resemble a Devon flag, only slightly.
Oh, brilliant.
That was just a fluke, but yeah, I love that.
It's an interesting piece.
So yeah, I think with the whole story, it definitely
ties in, doesn't it?
Yeah.
For sure, definitely. Okay, so just thinking about like the content and material you consume, what content or material should people be consuming in your sector for them to grow? Would you say?
Yeah, so in terms of content, as in like a day-to-day as a designer, or
whatever. So like from anything, could be a podcast, it could be what you're seeing online.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I alluded to earlier the fact that one of the reasons why I think we're seeing some organic growth is just the fact that actually we're kind of not magically selling ourselves, but we're kind of making people aware of us. And so when I joined StrcutureHaus, there wasn't that many people in the Southwest that particularly outside of the sector particularly knew who StrcutureHaus were. So LinkedIn at the moment is like such an amazing tool, and then Instagram is the other one that we're using. So we posting on both of those, just a couple of times a week, nothing crazy. Sometimes they're personal ones, and often they're StrcutureHaus ones. So Emma Louise does our marketing, and she's kind of responsible for that aspect. So using those is great because it makes people aware of you, but at the same time, it makes you aware of other people and what's going on in the industry and what's going on in the Southwest and who people are. And again, it gets around to that like communication and building relationship side of things. So on a kind of outside of the construction industry side, then it's definitely LinkedIn and Instagram, and I guess you probably bring YouTube into that for the youngsters. Like I've got a 9 and a 13-year-old, and they don't even watch TV; they watch YouTube, and it frustrates the hell out of me. But yeah, those are definitely really good tools. Inside the industry, then the Institute of Structural Engineers, they do like webinars. And the majority of our CPD training that I talked about earlier now is now online. So the reason why this table sits here and there's a big TV on the wall is because we do our continual professional development through a laptop plugged into there, and kind of disseminate that through to the whole team. So technology and computers and IT. Originally drawings were done on paper and calcs were done on paper, and now we're virtually a paperless office through a lot of hard work and me telling people to stop using paper. But so
it's a crazy change, isn't it?
It's definitely. That's probably the biggest change.
Cool. Okay. But in terms of like development professionally, I suppose all of these seminars is it the ICE?
Yeah, the ICE is the Institute of Civil Engineers, and the iStruct is the Institution of Structural Engineers. So obviously one is slightly more specialist, but they both lead into professionally. They both lead into you becoming CEng, Chartered Engineer. So Paul is chartered as ICE, and I'm chartered as iStruct.
Okay.
But yeah, so they're there. YouTube again, like they do so many videos about like lessons learned. Actually, I think I posted something on LinkedIn, which was like a massive wall that collapsed, and I felt like I wanted to post at that time because actually I wanted to remind people that what we do is quite important. It isn't just saving them money and just saving the embedded carbon and all that kind of stuff. It's stopping things falling down.
Can anybody access these sort of seminars and stuff from the IC and iStruct?
Yes, I think they can. Indeed. And definitely the YouTube stuff. It's
you can learn anything on YouTube.
I mean, I had to jump start my van from my car the other day and the battery isn't under the bonnet of either of those two things anymore. So it's like, how do I do that? YouTube, right? And there's lots of professionals that do that. I mean, when I was doing my end of year dissertation, there was like limited information on the internet, but it was there. It was definitely a tool. And even... Again, showing my age, unfortunately, but we talked about like the library and what was available in there, and like the stuff that was through microfiche and that kind of stuff. That not that old, but there's that aspect where now there's so much readily stuff available, but obviously you need to filter that through and recognise what is professional and what's not. But so the Institute of Structural Engineers do post YouTube videos, and then you can and lots of universities post it. So
it's great that it's so easily accessible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And even like, I have brain farts every so often, and I think, oh God, I can't remember something. But as the director, you don't really want to go and ask your graduate something that basic. So you
straight to YouTube.
Pop on YouTube. Yeah, exactly. But then I've also sat in the doctor's surgery, and he's been on YouTube. So but yeah. There's lots more material available now, which is great.
Okay, so what is your best advice to someone at the start of their journey in your industry?
Yeah, I think we touched on it before, but I think it's recognize what you want to do, how far you want to take your career, because not everybody wants to become a director. Some people really enjoy designing and they just want to be a designer for the rest of their life, and that's fine. And actually, businesses need that. So have that recognition of what you want to do, why you want to do it, like what flicks your switch, what gets you out of bed, so to speak, and then speak to the right people and learn the right path or the best path, because there's definitely more than one path that could suit you to get there.
Is that necessarily the quickest path, or
No,
No.
definitely not. I mean, I didn't take the quickest path, did I?
No.
So, and I think I said it before, but I do believe in destiny, and I think that I feel like I was destined to be in this position that I'm in, and as much as it took a slightly longer path than it did, I'd love to go back to my original school and speak to like my maths teacher and say, this is what
look at me now.
Yeah, look at me now. This is what did happen in the end, because it could have definitely not.
Well, that moves on quite nicely to the next question, with who has been or who is your biggest inspiration in your sector?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, because structural engineers don't talk to each other a massive amount, and I don't and I don't have like a local structural engineer that I go, oh, that guy is great, or that guy is great. I see other ones that have like similar things that make them do certain bits of design or that. But so I think, in a really boring but actual true answer, it is those original like architects, engineers, because it was the same thing, and like Brunel is up there, right? He's like, and I think where we live, funnily enough, is actually really poignant to some of his best and some of his worst work. So you only need to drive over Saltash Bridge or go to Clifton and see two of his brilliant examples.
Mad, isn't it?
Yeah, like proper insane. But then also, if you live in Dawlish and you've seen his railway collapse into the sea more than once, that wasn't
recently.
Yeah, exactly. That wasn't ideal.
Yeah.
And actually, I did a little bit of research in terms of that whole his mindset around that train line. And ultimately, he wanted the train line to be where it was in terms of it being scenic. But the way it worked was he wanted those trains to be steam driven, and actually not the steam in the train driving it, but the track pressurizing it. So underneath that railway line is like an underground tube, and then the pump house, which is in halfway to Dawlish, which begins with S. Starcross. That pump house there, that used to power that line, and so they pressurized that the underground tube that then pushed the train, because the train had something that came down and sat inside there.
Right.
But it didn't work because the pressure was leaking. So then they wrapped it in leather. But then that didn't work because the rats ate it. So Brunel was learning, and that was a process that Brunel learned.
It's proper old school engineering, isn't it? Like proper pioneering sort of stuff with that.
Which
super stuff
exciting.
You take like for granted now, don't you?
Yeah.
When you're a lot younger, you go across the Clifton Bridge and all of his other bridges. You just think about them as bridges, don't you? You don't think about how they're put together. But back then, when they were put together, the history behind it.
Yeah. I mean, a bridge is a great example in it, because everybody goes, "Well, you just design bridges," but it's the thing we always it's always the thing we come back to. And whenever we do any of these like school fairs or anything like that, we get them to build a spaghetti bridge.
Oh, we've all been there.
Yeah, exactly, right? So and then we give them some sweets if they do it well.
Classic.
Okay, well, talking about how the industry has obviously definitely changed since Brunel built some of his structures, but how do you think the industry will change in the next 10 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. So immediately in my mind goes back to, well, what's changed in the last 10 years? And then is that on like a trajectory, or is there like an exponential change in that? I think there is an exponential change in that. I don't think the exponential change is quite as extreme as what we think it might be. And that leads into like the technologies that we've got, and drawing back to the materials are materials, so it's how you use those materials. So then you start to talk about the design packages, and actually you can use those to work out exactly what forces are, rather than over designing and getting there. So I think that will continue. The sustainability aspect of it, and the built with carbon, and making structures and buildings more airtight in the first place, that will continue. So the detailing around how things fix and how things work will definitely change. Robotics and AI, I don't know if they will have too much of a change in the immediate future. And there's a reason why, there's something that reinforced that recently. So I went on a health and safety course because I wanted to be a first aider in the office as well, just because it's, you know, great for the team. And we had a guy who was doing robotics, and he said that the programming to get a robot arm to pick up is insane. And that's to do something as simple as what I can do that now. I didn't think about that, right?
Yeah.
And he said, so then you look at like how they've advanced robots to kind of jump on a box. And you think that's mental. I still think we're so far away from getting robots to think about how things work as a structure, or and how things work communication wise. But then I also and I don't know if this is true, so don't quote me on this, but I heard a story where they said that they put two robots in a room, and the two robots didn't speak the same language, but after 5 minutes they'd taught each other a language that they then were communicating. That both of the this is crazy, both of the people who had designed said robots didn't understand them, so they just panicked and pulled them apart. And
they didn't understand the language that they created themselves.
Yeah, so one design engineer had created this robot, and another one had created that robot, and they had two. So one spoke French and one spoke English, if you like. I put them in a room, and they'd created like full English.
Oh my gosh.
So they were like, they panicked and pulled them apart. And I think if that's true, and it definitely is true about the amount of software that has to go into an arm picking a glass up, then I think about all of the things that we've talked about already about how StrcutureHaus works well, and how I feel like I'm a good structure engineer is by understanding clients and having that in-depth experience. Can you teach a robot that? I don't know. I'm not too sure yet. I think we're a long way away from that.
Yeah, it seems like we're a long way off that sort of stuff, isn't
it? Thankfully.
Yeah, I'm not welcoming it, that's for sure. It's all a bit scary, isn't it?
Yeah.
Will the sort of software packages that you're using, you know, sort of Revit and Tekla and TED and all that stuff, will sort of the software get so clever where you'll have to put less and less data into those packages?
Yeah.
Could that be a way that things could go?
It could, definitely, yeah. I mean, one of the things which we talked about earlier was the collaboration between the architect and the structural engineer in the first instance in terms of building that. So it's like, well, how far apart shall I put my columns before I start losing like economy of scale? So what should my grid lines be for my building layout? So actually, if you had that conversation in the first place and then built the structure or the original Revit model as the architect, you could probably just put that straight into the structures package and not do much more. You could just say, well, actually, it's in Exeter on that street and it's facing that way north. And then that design package will already know what all those loads are.
All those inputs are.
Yeah, where at the moment it's not there yet. We have to work out those things and tell them those things.
Because I'm just thinking, you would have thought maybe 20, 30 years ago that these packages wouldn't be able to do these sort of things.
Yeah, exactly.
10 years' time.
Yeah.
You almost got to think the same, don't you, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, could it get that powerful where you can just chuck in, you know, some pretty simple stuff and then it designs a building for you?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of...
more of a human element to it, isn't there? But
yeah. I mean, maybe I'm being naive and hoping not, because that's what I want. But yeah, who knows? But when I really think back to when I was a graduate, how much has changed in the last 20 years, and it's just an ability to design things in 3D.
Yeah,
it's not crazy.
No,
and that's taken 20 years. You know.
Yeah.
Like mobile phones have popped up in that time. TVs changed a bit. I know they got a bit flatter, but not crazy, right?
No. We use them in the same way, don't we? But the exactly. Gets better.
Yeah.
I think looking at AI in a way that it's not so scary is seeing it as a tool to help you. So like the way that 3D has helped you now,
Yeah.
hopefully there'll be ways that it will help you rather than replace.
Nice,
It's
positive
how I
spin.
try to look at it.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So what is the best technology that you're currently using, would you say?
It's that the design packages of Tekla and Revit and putting those two together and then designing buildings collaboratively as a multidiscipline team. That obviously now is, us having interactions with different consultancies in different sectors now. And that, again, that's part of our, organic growth, is having those conversations with, exciting architects that are working on nice projects. And, winning work is also about relationships and speaking to the right people. So yeah, I think we need those tools, and Tekla and Revit and the people that run those, the drivers, if you like, is it.
So the last question, and possibly the most important.
Okay. How much do I get paid? No,
What is the best coffee you've ever had?
Oh, that's a good question, isn't it? Because we live in a nice city that has so many different ones.
Yeah.
And I have more Costas than I should do, and it's definitely not the best.
Don't
and
say
Starbucks.
that. Don't say
But
that.
we have some really nice, local companies. So I think that Team Bean are doing some really nice coffees, and their hot chocolate's amazing. And I think that X Valley Roasters are great. But probably the best ever one is
Gosh, I thought you'd given it to us there.
It's got to be. It's got not in Exeter. Sorry, it was in Belgium, and it was on a training camp, and it was a double espresso, and it was much needed at the time. So it was probably more about the experience than the coffee itself.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's it.
Nice.
Brilliant.
Well, thanks so much for having us, Mark, and for coming onto the podcast. I feel like we've had some really good conversations there. Really good conversations for structural engineers, but the education for people that may be listening to this that doesn't know about what you guys do and learns about the business and learns about the sector and the industry is amazing. And I think really useful information to have for people inside and outside of the industry. But if anybody wants to get into the industry, get in touch with Mark. If anybody
absolutely.
Needs help getting into the industry, if anybody's looking for a new opportunity, likes the journey that you guys are on, that sort of thing, it's worth reaching out, isn't it? Because you're in a place where you're organically growing and looking for the right kind of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And guys, thanks for coming in. Thanks for your time and effort, and I've enjoyed this more than I thought I might do.
That's great. And I've definitely learned a lot today.
Big time.
Cool.
Big time.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
Thank you.